Hey, welcome everybody to the Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours webinar. I'm Ben Reynolds, producer and host of the Event Webinar Series. Thanks for joining today's presentation. We are delighted to offer this enthralling opportunity to experience the biodiversity of the Galapagos Islands. Let's welcome our presenter, Michael O'Brien. Hey, Michael.
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
And Victor Emmanuel and Barry Lyon. We're going to turn to Victor Emmanuel for some opening remarks.
I've been fortunate to travel to all the continents and gone on probably 60 or 70 at different destinations of countries. But I count the Galapagos one of the top 10 I ever went to. I've always, for years and years, wanted to go there because that's where Darwin started his work that led to his work on evolution, which transformed science and nature. And to be there right where Darwin was and to see the giant tortoises and the birds that such as the mockingbirds, played a big role in his deciding that evolution really was occurring. And it's been a thrill to go there. I've been there about 6 or 7 times. It's one of my favorite trips. And I want to mention how fortunate I think you're going to be with Michael and Louise, who've been there numbers of times. He'll be talking about it, and who will be great people to be working, seeing the Galapagos with them. And also that this trip is scheduled at one of the best times of the year to be there because of the birding activity and the seabirds. And for me, one of the highlights was seeing the Galapagos or wave albatross on its nest and see the male and female interacting there right in front of me. So I hope you'll go on this trip. I know you'll have a wonderful time.
Great, thank you, Victor. And to let everybody know, this presentation will be in 2 parts. The first will be Michael O'Brien speaking about the biodiversity of the islands. And then Victor and Barry will talk about the islands in particular and the itinerary set for the departures in 2023 and 2024. So without further ado, we will turn to Michael's presentation.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk today about exploring the Galapagos Islands. It's one of my favorite places to go. It's just such a unique area, incredibly rich in natural history, absolutely breathtaking scenery, and just a wonderland for naturalists. There's no limit to photographic subjects for anyone who's a photographer. These are some just amazing scenes that you can see out there. So some of the birds you'll see out there, some of the wildlife might look familiar. Some maybe not quite as familiar. And some downright otherworldly. When you visit the Galapagos, one of the first things everyone will notice is how remarkably tame the wildlife is. And close-up encounters, such as this one with this waved albatross, are commonplace. Or maybe snorkeling with a Galapagos penguin. Or resting on the beach with some sea lions. Or some dolphins swimming right up to your panga. Or just walking right up to this incredible giant tortoise. So the tortoise is the foundation of the name of the Galapagos Islands, discovered back in 1535, and it was named the Island of the Tortoise. So the Galapagos lie on the equator. They're part of Ecuador, about 600 miles west of Ecuador, offshore in the Pacific Ocean. They are volcanic islands. They're on the north end of the Nazca Plate. And as this Nazca Plate has shifted eastward over the eons, over this hot spot, there's a hot spot of magma upwelling. And and each island has been formed as the plate shifts over this hotspot. So the islands off to the east are much older than the ones to the west. So Fernandina on the west, one of the west islands, 0.7 million years old, whereas Española on the east side, 3.2 million years old. So these western islands, you see a lot more, they look like just volcanic rock, a lot of them, and the eastern islands much more worn down. Because these islands are so far offshore, insulated from outside influence, there's been a lot of endemic species have evolved there. So that includes about 33 endemic birds, 7 endemic mammals, 32 endemic reptiles, about 86 endemic fish, and around 1,200 terrestrial invertebrates, insects, and other things. And all sorts of other marine invertebrates, maybe 850 more species there, about 250 species of plants. So when I give you these numbers, bear in mind that this depends on the author or the current state of taxonomy. It certainly has been in flux over the years, and various scientists do some research and decide, well, this is a different species, or they may maybe discover a new one. Of course, the Galapagos were made famous by Charles Darwin, whose exploration of the islands led to his theory of evolution through natural selection, which is now a fundamental scientific concept, and really the key to our understanding of diversity of life. The sketch on the right is pretty cool. It's from his notebook 2 years after he visited the Galapagos. And it's really the first depiction of an evolutionary tree, the concept that one species evolves from something else. When Darwin visited the Galapagos, one of the things he noticed was the mockingbirds in particular. He had seen the mockingbirds on the mainland South America, and then he saw these different mockingbirds on the islands and noticed that they looked a little different from the mainland birds, and then also each island they looked a little different. And he also noticed that the tortoises from island to island looked a little bit different. When it comes to the finches, the famous Darwin's finches, Darwin didn't scrutinize them that much while he was on the islands. He actually called them blackbirds, grosbeaks, and finches. But when he got back, he passed on the specimens to John Gould, who identified them as a dozen new species. So it wasn't until later that they were actually referred to as Darwin's finches. There's been a long history of conservation on the Galapagos, going back to the 1930s, when the government of Ecuador declared the islands a wildlife sanctuary. And they later elevated that to a national park and then added a massive marine reserve around the islands. So today, about 90% of the land and marine resources are protected. The Charles Darwin Station on Santa Cruz Island is a driving force for conservation in the Galapagos. They conduct research and education, and their research focuses on restoration, invasive control, and sustainable development. It's also a wonderful place to visit for tourists and birders. We see lots of good birds on the grounds there. As you travel around the islands, you'll notice various habitat zones. The coastal zone is is very narrow. It's really just the tidal areas. So beaches, rocky shores, mangroves. And then just inside of the coastal zone, you get right into the arid zone. So a lot of cactus and drought tolerant shrubs. And so this is a fairly wide zone. As you get uphill, you start to get into the transition zone where there's more deciduous trees, taller trees. And then when you get up higher, you get into the humid zone. It's really a cloud forest, dominated by these Scalesia trees, which are giant sunflowers. And they're adorned with mosses and epiphytes. And it really is cloudy, misty up there. It's quite an experience being up there. And due to prevailing winds from the south, the humid zone descends farther down slope on the south side of islands. So now I want to go through some of the specialties of the Galapagos. One of the more conspicuous animals you'll see is the Galapagos sea lion. They're really all over the place in beaches, shallow water. Whereas the fur seal, the Galapagos fur seal, also is actually also a sea lion. So some people like to call it the Galapagos fur sea lion. They hunt in deeper water, so it's more rocky coasts that tend to be closer to deep water. They're a little darker in color, shorter snout, and more grizzled fur. We don't see a lot of whales in the Galapagos, but we do see them occasionally, and it's always exciting when we get to see one. There's a number of different species we've seen, and sometimes maybe you'll see it at a distance. Notice the spout on the blue whale, this tall fire hose spout, the one on the bottom right, the blue whale, and the that 45-degree angle spout on a sperm whale on the upper right. It's much more common to see bottlenose dolphins. They'll often come right up to our boats, follow in the wake, ride the bow, so it's kind of fun. So reptiles are particularly conspicuous on the Galapagos. The marine iguanas are just everywhere along the coast, often in large numbers. They're the world's only seagoing lizard. Then they feed on algae in shallow water. And because they're feeding in salt water, they have to get rid of their they have to get rid of the salt. So you'll see them sitting on the beach and just every now and then snorting out seawater, this highly saline seawater. The land iguanas are much less numerous, and they're on several different islands. They're now split up into 3 different species. And it is believed that the marine iguana evolved from the land iguanas. So here we have the real monsters of the Galapagos, the giant tortoise, which can weigh more than 500 pounds. And depending on the taxonomist that you talk to, some of them are splitting it up. Each island with the different species. In fact, sometimes different volcanoes on one island, different species. So it is currently believed that there are 13 separate living species of giant tortoise. The Galapagos green sea turtle is another species that's very large. They actually can get to nearly 500 pounds as well. And they wander the seas, but they come to the Galapagos to breed. So sometimes they're visible in good numbers. Lava lizards might look big in this picture, but they're actually quite small. But brightly colored, beautiful little things. And there's at least 7 different species of those, all on different islands. So now to the birds. The white-cheeked pintail is a fairly numerous duck that we'll see. It's an endemic subspecies. It's widespread in South America, but the ones in the Galapagos look just a little bit different. A lovely little duck. Flightless cormorant is just a spectacular, weird, crazy-looking bird with those little wings. They don't really use those wings for much of anything. If you see how big the feet are, when they swim underwater, when they're fishing, they will tuck the wings in and just use the feet for swimming. Because the way the water currents are, there's the western islands are colder, and these flightless cormorants really prefer that colder area, so they're mainly in those western couple of islands. Another flightless bird, the Galapagos penguin, another just fabulous little bird to see. It's pretty amazing to see a penguin on the equator, or maybe even north of the equator. Unlike the cormorants, they do use their wings when they're underwater, so they basically look like they're flying underwater. And sometimes we'll get a chance to snorkel with these little guys, and then you can kind of see that up close. And if you don't snorkel, maybe a panga ride will get you up to where there's a penguin. Waved albatross, just a magnificent bird. It's what they call a near endemic. They breed almost exclusively on Hispaniola Island, and one of the oldest islands in the Galapagos. But there's a tiny population on another island off the coast of Ecuador, so not quite an endemic. We'll often get to see them doing these wonderful courtship displays. They sort of bow and bill snap and bob their heads. Just really cool to see. They do look a little awkward on land, but when they fly, just magnificent in flight. Galapagos shearwater is a bird we see in good numbers, a lot of them in nearshore waters. Like a lot of seabirds, they're dark above and light below, the counter shading for camouflage. And they tend to have this fluttery flap, flap, glide flight, generally low to the water. And we'll often see big numbers of them around sea cliffs where they nest. Galapagos petrel, another endemic species, a little bit harder to see. They breed up in the highlands, but they only visit the breeding sites at night. So during the day, they're mainly in offshore water. So it's when we get into some crossings between islands that we tend to have a better shot at seeing these guys. They're beautiful flyers, really languid wing beats and dynamic arcs through the air. So quite distinctive even when you see them at a distance. Storm petrels we'll see regularly right around our boats. They got their name because it looks like they walk on water like St. Peter. Really what they're doing is when they're feeding, they just pause momentarily and touch the feet down to give them a little surface tension as they pluck things off the water. There's 3 different species of storm petrels that we might see. Actually, a couple more that are rare possibilities, but 3 main ones. The Elliots on the left there is by far the most numerous one, and it's common close to shore. So we'll often see them when we're anchored near the beach. Wedge-rumped storm petrel in the middle is a little bit farther offshore, but still quite numerous. And we'll see quite a few of those. The band-rump storm petrel, which some people split that out into a different species, the Galapagos birds maybe being called the Darwin's storm petrel. They only visit their nesting areas at night, so sort of like the Galapagos petrel, it's one that we only see when we're out in sort of longer ocean crossings. And they look very similar, obviously. You can kind of tell them apart by wing shape and the width of the rump band, and then also their flight styles. Red-billed tropic bird, just a wonderful bird. They nest in these little nooks in sea cliffs, and you'll see pairs or little groups flying around in courtship flight, making these wonderful, raucous, screechy, almost tern-like calls. Just spectacular birds. Frigate birds are sort of ever present. They follow the ship. Sometimes they even sit on the rigging. We see 2 species which are tricky to tell apart. Magnificent frigate bird is the more widespread one. They're kind of on all the larger islands. The great frigate bird is a bit more restricted to some of the smaller islands. The males both have this big red, inflatable air sac on their chest. They're really hard to tell apart. You might see on the great frigate bird on the right has this brownish bar on the top of the wing. That's about the best way to tell the males apart. And here's the females, a little bit different pattern of white on the chest, but quite similar also. Boobies, we see 3 species of boobies. They're just wonderful birds to watch, especially when they're feeding. They're like torpedoes. They just sort of collapse their wings and plunge into the water. They can be 15 feet underwater in a split second. By the manner of their plunge dive. So really, really cool to watch. These are blue-footed boobies here. Blue-footed booby on the left there is primarily a coastal species. They feed in relatively shallow waters right near the islands. The Nazca booby tends to feed a little bit farther offshore, and the red-footed booby farther offshore still. So they sort of split up the foraging niches that way. The red-footed booby, unlike the others, they actually nest in trees. They perch in trees. They sometimes perch on ships, whereas the other two do not do that. The blue-footed booby has been declining quite a bit recently. The main reason is a decline in sardines, which is their main food source. Gulls, there's two endemic gulls. The swallowtail gull is just a spectacular bird. They breed in sea cliffs, and they're primarily nocturnal when they feed. They go offshore and to feed on squid and fish that come to the surface at night. So sometimes, maybe when we're cruising at night, you'll see a swallowtail gull following behind the ship. Just kind of appears from the blackness, this spectacular gull. The lava gull on the right is a much more solitary bird. You just see pairs here and there. It's actually one of the rarest gulls in the world, but they're scavengers, and they're happy to come up near people to see what they can find to eat. So they're pretty easy to see, but really quite rare. I happen to live in a place where there's a lot of laughing gulls, and I can see the obvious similarity between the laughing gull and the lava gulls. Clearly, this bird evolved from laughing gulls. Similar vocalizations and certainly similar appearance, aside from this bird being quite dark. That's one common theme you'll see to a lot of the birds on the Galapagos, is that they're darker from counterparts on the mainland. And that's an adaptation to blend in with that dark lava rock. Shorebirds, there's quite a few species of shorebirds that can be seen on the Galapagos. The American oyster catcher is a resident there. It's actually a resident subspecies, endemic subspecies. But other shorebirds like the wandering tattler are migrants that come down from Arctic breeding areas. So we can really see a diversity of shorebirds there. American flamingos occur in coastal lagoons throughout the islands. It's the same species that's widespread in the Caribbean. And they fly freely from one island to the next. And they look incredibly gangly and weird in flight, but obviously they're pretty good flyers, the way they can get around. The lava heron used to be considered a full species, now is considered a subspecies of the striated heron. Sort of like the lava gull, it's sort of a slaty gray version of its mainland counterpart. This one has captured an endemic fish species, the Galapagos four-eyed blenny. So you'll see these lava herons along the rocky coast, just feeding in little tide pools and beaches. There's a couple species of rails that occur in the Galapagos. They're very hard to see, but occasionally when we're up in the highlands, we might see a paint-billed crake, which is a bird that's widespread on the mainland South America also. Or if we're really lucky, maybe the Galapagos rail, which is an endemic species in the Galapagos, looks a lot like a black rail. And these birds are up in the highlands in just kind of dense ground cover. We might see one dashing across the road or just in a little opening. So it's a bird we always keep our eyes open for when we're up in the highlands. Galapagos dove, common throughout most of the islands. Beautiful little thing, relatively small dove. The Galapagos hawk is widespread on many of the islands, not quite all of them. The adults are dark, the juveniles are streaked underneath. They remind me a lot of Swainson's hawks. That's very likely what they evolved from. Owls we will see occasionally. Short-eared owl and barn owl, both of these are endemic subspecies. And like a lot of things, are a little darker than their mainland cousins. Both will feed on really a variety of things, rodents and birds. The short-eared owl especially hunts storm petrels. So if you're near a storm petrel colony, you might see a short-eared owl lurking on the perimeter. Galapagos martin is a widespread but uncommon species, usually seen in pairs or small groups. They nest in little nooks and sea cliffs, but they forage. They roam far and wide to forage. So one of the reasons you always feel lucky to come across one. Dark-billed cuckoo is a another species that is both on the mainland and out here on the Galapagos. Not uncommon, but sort of inconspicuous. Always fun to find one. Two species of flycatchers occur on the Galapagos. The Galapagos flycatcher is one of the Myarchus flycatchers. They're related to great crested or ash-throated, and they're small flycatchers. And then the bird on the right, the Brujo flycatcher, that's a recent split from vermilion flycatcher. And they look basically the same. The males are a little darker above, the females kind of brighter yellow underneath. And these birds are widespread, but they're very uncommon. So always a treat to find one. Sadly, there was another population of vermilion type flycatchers that were on San Cristobal, and they are now extinct. And that was recently also elevated to species status. So there had been 2 species of vermilion type flycatchers out there, now just 1. Mockingbirds, there's 4 species on the islands. The Galapagos mockingbird at the upper left is on multiple islands, the central and western islands, whereas the other 3 species are only on those oldest islands. Each of the Floriana, San Cristobal, and Española each have their own mockingbird, and those happen to be the 3 of the oldest islands. All of these mockingbirds are remarkably confiding and will approach people without hesitation. Tourists are always warned to stay at least 6 feet from all wildlife, and of course never feed them. But it can be tricky with some of these birds, like the mockingbirds especially. They just hop right up to you, so you need to kind of back off and give them their space. Another bird that's just as confiding as the mockingbirds is the yellow warbler. This is an endemic subspecies. It's part of the mangrove warbler group, which is a non-migratory tropical group of yellow warblers, mainly coastal, but not entirely. These Galapagos yellow warblers are not just coastal; they're from the coast all the way up to the highlands, and they're pretty much everywhere we go. So just wonderful little birds. So the Darwin's finches, fascinating group. Sometimes downright confusing because there's they look similar. There's probably some hybridization going on, so they can be a little bit of a challenge to sort through. On my first trip to the Galapagos 15 years ago, there were 13 species of Galapagos finches recognized, and now there are 17 species recognized with various splits. And these fall into 4 different genera, and so that can be a helpful way to sort them out. Some are unique to one island or another; others are more widespread. And you generally sort them out by body size, bill shape, color patterns, and also feeding styles. So identifying these finches can be quite challenging and enough to make your head spin. But if you look carefully and just sort of patiently watch these birds, you might notice some slightly different feeding techniques. Here, a small tree finch is picking at some fallen fruit. And here, a large ground finch cracking a giant seed, probably bigger than any other finch could crack. And here, a common cactus finch eating some prickly pear fruit. And here, a vegetarian finch plucking some dried berries. And here, a woodpecker finch digging for bark beetles, very distinctive behavior. And I could talk for hours more about these Galapagos finches. I find it really fascinating, but that tends to put everybody to sleep. So I'll end it there and hand it over to Victor and Barry.
Thank you, Michael, for that outstanding presentation. Starting with a nice overview of the islands, what all things Galapagos, the wildlife, the landscapes, the sense of history. As Victor said, it really is one of those must-see destinations. For people who love birds and nature, it's clearly one of the best places in the world to go, and really, you might even say an essential place to go. What we're going to do is we are going to spend a few minutes going through some slides here, just to basically to give you an overview of the actual tour route that we take with our trips, because no two trips that are operating in the Galapagos are exactly the same. The Galapagos Islands visitation is tightly regulated by the government of Ecuador and the Galapagos National Park. And so each program that by which a Galapagos cruise operates will visit different islands and so on. And we're going to demonstrate what our trips will be doing this year and next. As you can see, these are the dates of our next two voyages, and will be led by the dynamic duo, husband and wife team of Michael O'Brien and Louise Zemaitis. As Michael was saying, the bigger, more rugged, rocky, newer islands are on the west of the archipelago, as demonstrated principally by Isabella and Fernandina Islands, whereas the older islands are off to the east, San Cristobal being the oldest of the lot. Looking at the map here, as Michael had stated, the Galapagos lies 600 miles off the coast of the mainland. In the old days, it used to be that to get to the Galapagos, you would travel by ship from the mainland. I'm going back decades now. The difference now being that accessing the Galapagos is a much easier deal. You fly from Ecuador, typically from the coastal city of Guayaquil. Flights from Quito stop there usually. And there are two main places by which where people embark the ship. One is the island of Baltra, just on the north side of Santa Cruz in the center of the map. The other is at San Cristobal off to the right there. This is a representation here, a strong representation of the route that our trips will take, our next two Galapagos trips. In the center of the map, you can see the demarcation D2 right there next to Baltra. We have got a number of islands included here. It's a nice tight itinerary to maximize your enjoyment of these islands. What we will do from Baltra, we will then circle around to Santa Cruz, the big island in the center here, to Puerto Ayora on the southeast coast and the Charles Darwin Research Station. We will visit Santa Cruz. We will actually make a couple of visits to Santa Cruz Island. From Santa Cruz, we will continue southeast to South Plaza Island, on down to Santa Fe, and then off to the east here at San Cristobal, and then down south to Española, incomparable Española. And I'm going to pause here briefly, and I want to comment on this. One of the questions that gets asked is it possible to visit all of the islands on a single cruise? It really no longer is. And again, this gets back to what I was saying about the fact that visitation is strongly regulated by the National Park Service, the government of Ecuador. And so operators like us have to choose from a variety of routes. And we felt that it just wouldn't be good to miss Española Island, where the waved albatross and all these other nesting seabirds are, dramatic coastal scenery and so on. And so that is one of the centerpieces of this program. I mean, all the islands are special, but we did feel that including Española in the program was essential. We will then move west to Floriana Island and all that it has to offer, the famous Post Office Bay, where you have a chance to drop off a postcard and so on. And it's also the site where the Floriana Mockingbird, the only site where the Floriana Mockingbird can be found. And then from there, we will head back up to Santa Cruz Island. On Santa Cruz, it certainly goes without saying that we will see the Galapagos tortoises. There are basically two main, a person could do numbers of things on Santa Cruz, but we make sure that our programs include the highlights, which is a visit to the Charles Darwin Research Station, where the tortoise conservation and propagation efforts are centered, but also here in the center of the island, where we have got it marked Highlands. That is where you get up to see the tortoises, the rails that Michael talked about, and also a couple of the special Galapagos finches are up there as well. Namely, it's a good place to see woodpecker finch and I believe the large tree finch. What we do, of course, the trip starts with an arrival into Quito, the capital city. It is most easily accessed by air travel from a number of major American cities. We do not spend a lot of time in Quito. It's mainly the jumping off point to get to the Galapagos. However, for those people who arrive early, Quito being at the elevation that it is, I want to say about 9,000 feet, the gardens often have some wonderful birds around it, including some special hummingbirds like the sparkling violet ear and the black-tailed train bearer. And numbers of our travelers on Galapagos trips will sometimes come early and spend some time birding the gardens and surrounding area. We will fly to the Galapagos from the mainland. From Quito, most flights do stop in Guayaquil on the way out. And as I discussed, and which is highlighted in this slide here, Baltra is our destination. We will spend the next 6 days basically cruising among the islands. And there's always a caveat here that the National Park Service has final say on the exact routing that we take, but this is a strong representation of what your cruise route is going to look like. We will go to North Seymour Island. It's a wonderful place, really. I was there, Victor Emanuel and I, the last time we were there was with Michael O'Brien, Louise Zamitis, on a trip that we did to the Galapagos in 2009. And that was not my first time in the Galapagos, but it was my first time visiting North Seymour. And it is a wonderful place with all the breeding birds, frigate birds and other things to see there, boobies, frigate birds. This slide here kind of captures the feeling of the place. Here's some blue-footed boobies doing their fancy footwork, showing their fancy footwork rather. Remarkable birds, just really one of the iconic sights of the Galapagos Islands. Here again are the frigate birds, great and magnificent frigate birds, as Michael discussed. We will make our first visit to Santa Cruz Island, the Charles Darwin Research Station. The itinerary, the summit, besides the research station and the highlands, itinerary is loose enough that allows us to do other things, shore landings in different places and so on. And of course, the entire time, purely about birding and natural history. The giant tortoise, probably the most iconic of the iconic, always a highlight, always an objective is getting people good views, close-up views of the tortoises. But of course, we're birding the entire time. As Michael was really hitting on, the different Galapagos finches that are around. You've got the woodpecker finch in the center, tool user. You've got tree finches and ground finches and cactus finches. Lots of fun. One thing I will say here real quick, on these islands, the captions you're seeing, the name Santa Cruz, you're seeing in parenthesis, indefatigable. What these are is you're seeing what is now the popularly accepted names, followed by the parenthetical names, which is what the names of the islands as they were originally given. Michael talked about the Galapagos rail. Like the black rail, a furtive, secretive little bird that we have a chance for in the highlands. The tall forest are what is known as Scalesia trees, and they dominate in the highlands. It's not all an arid desert-like environment, all the way across, as opposed to some of the coastal locations. The highlands, particularly on places like Santa Cruz, are quite verdant and lush. At some point, we may visit Mosquera Islet on the western side of Santa Cruz Island. Great place to see the Galapagos sea lions, Galapagos mockingbirds. And of course, Lava Gull, which, as Michael pointed out, nowhere common, but present here and there. South Plaza, when Michael was talking about the Galapagos land iguanas and the speciation, they're currently recognized 3 species. South Plaza is one of the premier spots to see the giant land iguana, and we're glad it's in the itinerary for that reason. Beautiful red-billed tropic birds can be seen in the air, can be seen on the water. We always hope to see one on the water because it's not an everyday occurrence, but you get to see that long ribbon-like tail, and it is just such a beautiful bird. More on South Plaza, the boobies, often side by side, Nazca blue-footed boobies. The swallow-tailed gulls again, just a gorgeous, stunning thing. Then we make our way over to San Cristobal in the east. And, as I had mentioned, for many Galapagos programs, this particular island is where the other airport in the archipelago is. Not every program, not every trip visits San Cristobal. Numbers of our trips through the years have, but not all of them. Numbers have not. It just depends on what the cruise routing is. But this is a beautiful island. It's older. It's more evenly, smoothly contoured. The timeless forces of erosion have worn the island down. You have a lot more rounded hills and so on. A very pleasing environment there. And of course, it's also the home of the San Cristobal mockingbird, found nowhere else in the world. The dark-billed cuckoo, more finches, warbler finch, and so on. Just representative of some of the things that you'll have a chance to see on San Cristobal. Offshore of San Cristobal, one of the real treats is the Kicker Rocks, which are I believe, eroded volcanic islands, as it says here, volcanic tuff. And it's often a scenic place to cruise by, and if the conditions are right, can be quite birdy, seabirds around the rocks and so on. This is a representation of, you get more of these, more of the broad white sand beaches here with the sea lions and so on. The photo on the right depicts the sea lions on the beach, and in the distant back are the Kicker Rocks, just offshore. Another place to see boobies, and I'm going to pause here again. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that one of the nice things about the Galapagos, one of many nice things about the Galapagos, is that you often have repeated chances to see some of these things. So, you might go to a place and think, well, I'm glad I saw the Nazca booby, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to have a chance to see it again. Well, that's not necessarily so, because many of these things are available on more than one island. And for people who are photographers, the Galapagos are a dream come true. Española, you can see on the map on the left image there, Española, down there at the bottom, also known as Hood Island, but we're back to calling it Española, fortunately. There are a couple of places that we go. Gardner Bay is one of them, but this is where we go and hope to see things like the Española mockingbird, which we always do. Again, found nowhere else in the world but this island. The beloved waved albatross, the only place really to see them, the only place where they breed, except for the small island off the coast of Ecuador, as Michael noted. One of the things that we like to emphasize about our trips is that by going in the May-June period, you are assured of seeing these albatross on the ground. Trips that go early in the year, earlier than the beginning of May or after mid-December, risk not seeing the albatross on land because they're all out to sea. But of course, they return to land for the breeding season. And on the right, there's a pair interacting, which our groups get to see. Floriana, there's the aforementioned Floriana mockingbird, quite distinct. Interestingly, it's only found on an offshore islet called Champion. Mainly, this is due to non-native predators, invasive species having done significant damage to the original island botanical community. And that's a whole nother discussion. There are some amazing efforts going on to restore the Galapagos to their their previous splendor, when they are gradually ridding the islands of non-introduced or introduced herbivores and so on. But Champion Island is where we go to see the Floreana mockingbird. And here again, not every program offers this, to be sure. There's a view of Floreana, some flamingos in the near ground. It's a nice place. An older island, more eroded, as opposed to the real ragged volcanic contour. You get these nice, evenly shaped hills and low mountain. Post Office Bay, the famous Post Office Bay. This is where you're able to, you can drop letters and also pick them up and take them home and distribute them. And they can be put there by anybody and taken home by anybody. It's a fun tradition. Another place, Floreana is a place to see the Galapagos penguin, which I might add is the world's northernmost breeding penguin species, the only equatorial penguin, and that's significant. The Galapagos penguin, the Galapagos albatross, you have the world's only equatorial penguins almost side by side with the world's only equatorial albatross. Fun fact. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ship, and then we definitely have some what we hope will be useful comments here. For these next two voyages, we will be using the Coral II, a yacht-style vessel. And one of the points that I want to make here is that there are numbers of ways to see the Galapagos Islands by ship. Numbers of companies operate programs to the Galapagos. I think our viewers are probably it's probably very clear to our viewers here, our audience. But the options are almost unlimited. You can travel there. You can travel in the Galapagos from almost small-sized sailboats all the way up to very large adventure-style cruise ships where you can take 200 or 300 people. We do not care for that. We think that the right range is anywhere in that, say, 18 to 32 range, where you can have enough people to really share in the camaraderie of it all, while still preserving that important sense of intimacy that a smaller size vessel offers. The Coral II is a 20-guest vessel. And I will say that, we made a decision that we wanted this kind of a vessel because, numbers of our competitors, frankly, will use a catamaran style vessel, which, it's fine, not to disparage it in any way. But with a vessel like this, a little larger vessel, a steadier vessel, what you get with a ship like the Coral II is you get a stable, steady passage among the islands, less chances for disruption from rougher seas, although the Galapagos, generally speaking, are well protected from that. But also you get high quality accommodations and food, spacious cabins, spacious public areas, but also ample room on the viewing decks to be outside looking at stuff when you're cruising. For what Victor has emphasized for years, what we all believe in is quality, quality, quality. And we think that we deliver that with our Galapagos programs centered on a ship like the Coral II. So a little bit about the Coral II. For some of our audience who may not be familiar with how it works in the Galapagos, you're on the ship and then you're on the shore, and you go back and forth. And how does that work? Well, the ship will carry a fleet of Zodiacs that regionally are called pangas, but that is the same idea. A Zodiac, a panga, it's the same type of a craft, and that they can take anywhere from, depending on the distance you're going, 8 or 10 people. And this is how you're ferried from ship to shore and back again, is you ride around on these pangas. This is an example of what the Coral II has to offer. Here, the ship is almost side by side with the Coral I, which is the sister ship, a little larger. We prefer this one at this time because of the fact that It's a 20 passenger ship and just a little smaller. We were liking that this time around. But this is an example of what an outdoor meal looks like, weather permitting, which it usually does. This is another view of the outside of the ship, where you can either eat, relax, do some sea watching. Here it demonstrates that the outdoor dining option that they have, or it's a feature that undoubtedly, they have restaurants there's a restaurant the primary restaurant is indoors, but also they're set up to provide outdoor meals as well, again, weather permitting. These are what some of the cabins look like. This is the standard plus. There are 4 of them, and they have different bed configurations. And 128 square feet, you get the size that we know some of our travelers like, as opposed to being hemmed in a little tiny room. Another perspective on one of the other cabins. Here is another cabin, another standard plus cabin, this one with a larger bed. This is a junior cabin. I'm just cycling through a few of these cabin shots here just to impart an idea of what you can expect, what some of the options are, the accommodations options. Passenger lounge, wonderful place to unwind between excursions during the day, late in the day, in the afternoon for a recap session before dinner, or if you just want to take time out and look at photos, read a book, have a drink. All these things are available to you. Here is another perspective, big windows, so you can be inside and still see what's going on outside. This is shots of the indoor dining area, the restaurant. Again, spacious enough to allow single seating, so there's no rotation. Everybody can be in the dining room at once. A couple of additional shots of the dining area. This is the deck plan, which I'm going to talk about. Our tour operations manager, Greg Lopez, oversees this trip on the office side of things. Anybody who's interested in following up this presentation, inquiring more about the ship, wanting to perhaps reserve a cabin, Greg is the person to talk to in terms of being able to highlight some of the differences here and what the various options are. We have nine spaces left, I'm told, so we're about halfway sold out. We expect that the trip will sell out. The Galapagos Islands aboard the Coral 2 will operate May 27th through June 5th this year, June 11th through 20th next year. Again, featured leaders, Michael O'Brien and Louise Zamitis, who have led numbers of Galapagos cruises for Vent over the last 15 years. So they're certainly experts on this trip and really the ideal couple to people to travel pretty much anywhere, but certainly from the Galapagos Islands. And cabins begin at $99.70 per person in double occupancy, again from Quito. The trip is limited to 18 people. If you have any questions about the ship or would like to register, again, please contact Greg Lopez. Greg's email is there. And you can also reach Greg by calling our office. One of the things that is certainly last but certainly not least is that we have found over many years of operating Galapagos programs that numbers of our travelers, since they're going all the way to Ecuador, like to do a little bit more than a trip to the Galapagos, or they like to complement the Galapagos with time on the mainland. And so we have pre-trips and extensions this year, the Tandiapa Valley, which is a region in the upper middle elevation of the Andes northwest of Quito, centered around the town of Mindo, depicted on the map there. You will be entering just a realm of cloud forest and cloud forest birds. It's a phenomenal way to, again, match your time in the Galapagos with time on the mainland. Our longtime tour leader, Paul Greenfield, who leads our Ecuador tours and who's also one of the authors and illustrators of the landmark field guide, The Birds of Ecuador. Paul will lead that trip. And we have some talented local leaders who work with Paul. We really can't think of a better way to enjoy an experience to Ecuador with these two trips. We thank you for your time. Victor, if you have any closing thoughts here you'd like to offer.
Again, underscore what I said before. If you haven't been to Galapagos, it should be very, very high on your list. And as Barry mentioned, that pre-trip in the cloud forest right outside of Quito, there are hummingbirds, there are tanagers. It's a wonderful complement to the birds you're going to see on the Galapagos. We only have 9 spaces left on this trip, and it's going to be to go with Michael and Louise is a fabulous experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Victor and Barry. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the presentation, and our presenters, Michael O'Brien. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And we want to thank Victor and Barry as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for doing such a great job, and thank you, Michael, for doing such a great job. And again, if at all possible, even if you've been to the Galapagos, I'd recommend going back. Every time is wonderful.
Great. Thanks, everybody.